Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining me. I am Lydia Crafts. I live here in Newcastle and I'm running for Maine House District 90 to represent Bremen, Bristol, Damerscotta, Newcastle, Monhegan and Louds Islands, and parts of South Bristol and Noblesboro. So welcome to those who are joining us for the first time. I'm offering a weekly Facebook Live series entitled Community Coming Together. So I chose Community Coming Together initially at my launch party to explain and try to express the thoughts and ideas I have for why I'm running to represent our great community in Augusta. I work as a clinical social worker at the Bristol Consolidated School, and there in that role, I really work on advocating for all families and children in our school community. I really believe that representation matters, and the more voices we bring to the table, the better off our entire community and state are and will be. So with that focus in my professional life, I want to bring that to Augusta as your representative. So recently, yesterday morning, I was able to join the 7th grade social studies class with Becky Cooper and Donnie York. It was a privilege to join the adolescent students who are learning about state government. And we talked a lot about campaigns, why it matters, how it works, what the election process is like. And so I brought up a couple of topics with them, and I just want to share those here. One is we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and in such a climate, it's really important that we're all safe and healthy. And the best way I can advocate for safe and healthy elections in our primary on July 14th is to encourage absentee voting. So this can be done in one of two ways. You can contact your town office directly, or you can go to maine.gov and request an absentee ballot simply online. The absentee ballots will be sent out beginning May 30th and will continue through Election Day. So please take care of yourselves. Make sure that your voice is counted and that your voice is heard. That's my campaign, right? That's why I'm running. The other thing that students asked me about yesterday was, what are your priorities? A lot of kids had, they prepared questions and it was great. So what are some of your policy priorities? And one that came up in talking with a bunch of students remotely on a Google Meets platform was internet accessibility. And as we know, living in a rural state, internet is limited for a lot of folks. And what internet there isn't always reliable or fast enough to support our local economy, our local telemedicine, and our education system. We have a lot of students in AOS, all students in AOS 93 right now, participating in free and public education via remote learning. It's really important now, but as we'll get into in a few minutes, it's always been important, and it will continue to be important that our state and local community have accessible, reliable, high-speed internet. So with that, I'd like to introduce a couple of guests I've brought in. I'm really excited and happy to have them. I'm gonna unpin myself and go to gallery view. Here we go. So from the Island Institute, I have Kendra Jo Grindle and Krista Thorpe here to talk with me about broadband internet, what it means, why it's important, and sort of some upcoming events and participation ways we can take action in our local and state community to increase accessibility. So welcome, Kendra Jo. Why don't you start with an introduction?
Sure. Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone who's watching and tuning in and interested in learning a little bit more about internet connectivity in Maine and where we're headed. So I'm Kendra Jo Grindle. I'm a community development officer at the Island Institute. We're based in Rockland. I work on a couple of teams. I support our fellows program as well as our climate energy strategy, but my main focus is leading our broadband initiatives team. And with that, I will let Krista, who's also on this team, introduce herself.
Great, thanks, Kendra Jo.
Thank you, and thank you, Lydia, for hosting us. My name's Krista Thorpe. I grew up in the district, which Lydia is seeking to represent. I grew up in Newcastle and now live in Bremen and work at the Island Institute as the education project lead, and I'm also involved in the Broadband project, focusing on digital literacy and digital inclusion. Prior to Island Institute, I was teaching at Lincoln Academy, and I now also serve on the AOS 93 school board, so have really just been privileged to get to be very involved in the community where I grew up.
That's great. So can you, Kendra Jo, you mentioned the broadband, community-driven broadband committee. Is that the right term for it? Or
So
team?
so we have a community-driven broadband team.
Okay, great. So how long ago was that formed, and tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. So, well, first, let me introduce the Island Institute as an organization. For those of you who don't know, the Island Institute works to sustain Maine's island and coastal communities and exchange ideas and experiences to further the sustainability of communities here and elsewhere. So we started back in the 80s, really focused on environmental and land conservation, and have grown so much through our work with islands, particularly the 15 unbridged year-round islands. And as we work to sustain those communities throughout Maine, we really started to see the coast as the lifelines to the sustainability measures of those communities. So shifting our work a few years ago to incorporate coastal communities all the way up the coast. There's a little over 120 of them, and really making sure that they equally are sustained, involved, have a voice, and understand the various levels of projects and engagement, but community engagement being the key to that. And so a few years ago, probably about 5 years ago, we're in 2020, so I guess about 6 years ago, we were hearing a lot, especially from island communities, about issues that they were having, and no one came out and said broadband or internet, but there was this common thread that came through all of these stories: education, small business. I can't get my credit card machine to run, and I've got a line of customers out the door. I'm an artist in this community, and I want to sell my wares, but I can't get online. I don't have this online presence. Education, really trying to get outside of your own classroom and into other classrooms, or higher education. And Krista will talk about that a little bit as well. But there were so many layers, job diversification, where you are, not having to leave your community all the time. There were so many things popping up, and we couldn't take on all of them, but we found this common thread of broadband access and reliable high-speed internet access. And that's where we really started to focus in as an organization. And it's brought us to where we are now. And one of the really great pieces of work that we have and we support communities through is this community-driven broadband process. We have a guide and a model that I think is shared in the chat and was a part of this invitation. And, it's just a really strong way of showing how all the pieces, financial pieces, the end user benefits and experience, the models you pick and who you work with in your community, are all tied with community engagement and engaging your neighbors, your municipal leaders, your community leaders, your anchor institutions, state, and to make sure that you're lifting your community up as a whole, connecting everyone as a whole, and really looking at this issue as a community-wide or statewide issue, not just a personal, I can't get online, or I can't sell something online, I can't be a strong producer in the Maine economy because of a lack of internet or an unreliable connection of internet. And so that's kind of how we got started, and we have a really strong presence throughout our coastal communities and islands. We also have a senior policy officer who works at the state level to ensure that the state understands this community approach, and there's a lot of buy-in around that. There's a lot of support for the effects communities can have. And so we know that rural Maine is lifted when state takes notice and provides support, and building out infrastructure in rural Maine really helps lift the entire state.
Yeah, so I think that's really important, especially here in this district, both the rural nature and the coastal perspective. And I know, our district includes Monhegan and Louds Islands. And so really being aware of how those day-to-day operations at a state level really trickle down and have some impact on small rural communities and specific to island and coastal communities. I think that's great. I'm excited.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this approach that we've taken through the community-driven process, it it helps communities take control of a situation that they have, and bring their voice into that, and bring their priorities, their expectations of what they see for their future community and for their community now. And that's really an important voice to have at the table.
That's great. And I like that that's built in naturally to that community driven piece, that's kind of the foundation of the work that you're doing. That's great. Excellent.
And Lydia, I'll jump in a little bit with education here in the state, since I know that is a community you're very involved in, working for the schools, as well as an area where you're really looking to dig in. And so here in Maine, we are fortunate to have Network Maine and the Maine Schools Library Network, which is funded by the federal E-rate program, among other funding, but basically makes it so all our schools themselves have great connectivity. Here in AOS 93, I've gotten to talk to KJ Flewelling, who's the director of IT in this area, specifically in AOS 93, and has talked about how lucky all the schools are to have really reliable high-speed internet for the kids to access while they're in school. But like we've said before, kids aren't always in school when they're learning, and that's not just during COVID-19, but that's when they're doing homework the rest of the year. So the Pew Research Center put out a really great analysis detailing the extent of the homework gap in the United States. And that is real here as well, in the pockets of our community that don't have access to reliable internet, as well as the families that can't afford high-speed internet or any internet. And so the low-income households, minority households, made up the disproportionate share of the 5 million households in the US with children who were falling behind because they didn't have internet access to complete homework.
Yeah, I think that's a really important piece, that, there's that remote learning right now, but that homework gap, that there are many hours outside of the school day where children who have access to high quality, reliable internet, have an unfair advantage to those who don't. And I know that reliance on cell phone service is a big, there's a big kind of interruption or gap there, that, for families who have to rely on any kind of data over cell phone, that it doesn't work. And we're seeing that, I'm seeing that with families and trying to get folks set up with hotspots, and what it looks like if that's the only access you have, or the only affordable access. So I think it's so important. Also, we've talked about education, and I know that there are other, this idea, Kendra Jo, that you brought up around economic development, that we have, it's the 21st century. And I know lots of local artists, folks who are able to work remotely already prior to this pandemic. And that internet is a really big piece of that. And, Governor Mills just announced kind of this rural reopening plan, and Lincoln County is included in that. And I think about all of the small business people who already are trying to make life in rural Maine work for them, while they're also sustaining themselves and their family and their household. So that economic development piece is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And small businesses in Maine are kind of the backbone of this economy, whether it's small business, in the fishing industry or right on Main Street. And I think one thing that, this time of crisis has kind of shown is the way we rally around some small businesses, how adaptable they can be when a situation rises like this. And, seeing a lot of small businesses shift to an online presence, depend on that online presence. And for all of the ones in, your downtown Main Street that might have okay service, that's feasible. But for those who don't have that brick and mortar storefront or don't live right in town, whether it's a rural town or right in Portland, it is a strain if you can't meet your orders, if you're spending hours and hours trying to load pictures or having to go to your library. It's the time that you're giving up because a slow internet connection or a lack of is just not efficient and not a way to run businesses. And we see a lot of small businesses trying to find those efficiencies where they can. How can you have to in order to keep up, because if you're connected as a consumer, you kind of have everyone at your table. You can pick and choose, where you want to find something. And so having the reliability of the back of the infrastructure that is the internet in our state just really supports economic prosperity across the state. It creates jobs, it brings jobs, and brings people into our state who are buying homes and putting their children in our school and giving back to their community, who maybe their job is elsewhere, or maybe their job is in another town, but they really want to live where they want to live and not live in the town where they have to work. And it just provides just a decrease. It takes away a barrier. We see individuals who can diversify their businesses or their business opportunities because they can take trainings online or build out areas of their presence online. And it's little things, but they add up across the state, and they really do bring quite a bit back into our economy. Every dollar invested in internet infrastructure, broadband infrastructure, really does come back into the state times over. So.
That's fantastic. Yeah, recently I was I grew up in Belfast, and like all of my friends, we all left for college, and I was the first and only one to return back to Maine for about 10 years. And recently my closest friend and her family moved back, and when the pandemic hit, she's a clinical psychologist, and looking at how to continue to provide telemedicine services remotely. The day one of quarantine was, how do we get internet at home that's dependable and reliable and allows two adults to be online at the same time and to do their work, providing a really essential service. And we are very privileged and lucky to have Lincoln Health and the Miles campus here in Damariscotta. And I think that, healthcare in a rural state is so vital, and kind of an addition to, we've talked about education, economic development. About 10 years ago, or I guess 8 years ago, I was at the VA at Togus for my clinical rotation in graduate school. And they, telemedicine for rural veterans is huge. To be able to keep someone from having to drive 4 or 5 hours to receive medical care, they could, they could offer that remotely. So I think, there are universal needs that all communities have for why it's important to have a high quality, reliable internet. And then there are really specific ones, kind of, connecting back to the Island Institute's mission, that coastal and island communities really draw on those specific needs that are unique to what happens here. So that's great. I am wondering if we could sort of shift a little bit into some of those local initiatives. And, I think we talk about internet, we all feel like, oh yeah, we have it. Sometimes it's slow. Sometimes my Zoom meeting crashes or freezes. But kind of the difference, can you walk us through, this idea of what cable internet versus fiber and what that looks like, and some of those projects happening here in our community?
Absolutely. So I'll give a little background, and then I'll let Krista kind of dive into that local picture. So when we say the word broadband, for some of us, we might think, yeah, I know what that means, but it's really a speed. It's a speed that's set by the FCC based on the average speeds across the country, so it can shift. It shifted a few years ago to be a higher speed, so it's 25 megabits per second download. So the speed at which you're consuming, so you're watching your videos, you're really taking in the internet. A lot of us do consume throughout our days, and then the other part is 3 megabits per second upload speed. So right now we're uploading this video onto the web. So, having that upload speed is also really important because as producers in the state, producing content, producing business, producing your wares, it's really important to also have that strong upload signal. So 25.3 is, that's the basic definition of broadband, and it's the basic minimum that we see for grants. Connect Maine Authority also pulls that into their statewide definition of broadband. And so it's really good just to keep that in mind. If it's reliable, it's a pretty good speed. If it's unreliable, you still face some of the issues, even if you had a slower service. And that's where the infrastructure that brings you that speed, that brings you the broadband internet speed, is really critical. And that's really what we try to help communities understand as well, is as communities go through our process, we say, okay, you want connectivity throughout your entire community. Mm-hmm. What are you willing to invest in? Something that helps you now, or something that's going to help you continually into the future, and you won't have to keep investing. And that's where we get into the difference between fiber and copper cable line, or that cable coax that we always kind of know as internet.
So can I pause just for a second, since this
Sure.
is definitely not my area of expertise. So is it possible to get cable speeds of internet that match that 25.3 rate?
It is.
Okay, but what you're saying is the infrastructure is less reliable.
Absolutely.
And it's coming through those copper networks versus fiber.
Yeah, so the easiest way we kind of describe the difference is copper, it ages quicker than fiber, and it loses speed over distance. So you live on a long road and that fiber line connectivity is at the beginning, and then you have a copper cable coming down. That first neighbor is going to have pretty great speeds. That neighbor is probably not going to complain about reliability and their speed, and they're going to be the one that says, my internet's great, right? But as you go down the line and you lose speed over time and more people get online in the evenings, you start to see, oh wait, 5 neighbors down is a little bit slower. And now everyone's watching a show at night, and now I'm even slower. And then you get to the end, it's even slower. So that's really one of the key differences between that fiber and the copper, is that it does lose speed over distance. So even though you can, and you probably are paying for a speed that meets the broadband minimum, over time and over distance, you are getting lower and lower speeds. So if anyone's interested that's listening, you can go online and you can check your speed right now and just see, what are you getting? Is it 25.3? Is it the 50.10 that you're paying for? Is it 10.1? Depending on the day, it's different. Depending on how many users are on, it's different. We all kind of know that buffering signal when too many people are online. That's the saturation issue that you see with copper as well. Fiber, you don't see it as often, but copper, really, you do see that saturation of, oh, there's 5 devices connected. Quick, someone turn off their cell phone so I can finish watching this video or load up this web page. So that's one of the key things that we do see a difference in.
Okay, great. That's excellent. Thank you so much for explaining that. You said that you can find your connectivity rate. Is that through your provider, or where do you see the rate?
So when you purchase your, I just became a new resident here at my home, and so I was given different levels, different tiers, 50, or 150, those kind of speeds, and you kind of pick. They do price differently based on what you need, and for some it really matters.
Subscribe to.
Yeah, okay. And you can call up and check what your speed is, or request more. But it's good. We have a lot of community members throughout Maine who check their speeds quite often, because it's a matter that they really truly care about, and they like to prove, you say you give me this, but I'm really not getting it.
That's great. So Krista, maybe walk us through, I know Bremen and Bristol both have their own community initiatives to expand broadband. So can we talk about that a little bit? Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I'll unmute
Sorry.
myself. Yeah, a couple hundred people in Bremen at least have taken speed tests in the last couple months, because that was a question on the broadband survey that the broadband committee put out. And Bremen actually had a broadband committee form about a year ago, and I am on that committee. And we just this week successfully submitted a grant application to the Connect Maine Authority for a grant toward building fiber to every home in Bremen. And that is the, clap moment,
Yeah,
celebration
that
moment
seems
at
like
the
a
end of,
project.
at the end of a pretty long process, not as long as what a lot of communities go through though. The community-driven broadband model, if people look at all the different steps of that, there are communities up and down the coast and islands especially that have been working on this issue for years. In Bremen's case, a small committee came together as a working group. The librarian, Yvonne Glode, knew that I was working at Island Institute and was interested in the issue of broadband access on the coast. And so when another fellow from town, Ernie Carroll, happened to mention to her hearing an NPR story about all the issues we've just talked about, people being held back. He wondered what the situation was in Bremen. And even though for him, his internet was fine, but he was hearing that it was really affecting businesses and other folks. And so he got in touch with me. We over time pulled together a group that was pretty representative of the community, as far as people who've been here for many decades, an IT worker who was really critical on our team, who's the town's go-to person on all telecommunications issues, came together with a teleworker who'd recently moved his family here and was having to pay around $100 a month for his home internet, DSL copper, which wasn't sufficient for doing his job as a data analyst for Cisco, doing this amazing global work. Couldn't do it from home, so had to also pay $100 a month for a co-working space in Damariscotta. So he had been chomping at the bit for better internet for a while. A couple other members of the community came together, and we started informally, just trying to figure out the extent of the issue. What is the situation in Bremen? We have one internet service provider, ISP, which is Tidewater Telecom, based out of Noblesboro, and it's associated with Lincolnville Communications Incorporated. They're a family of companies. And they had done an upgrade of the whole town to DSL in the 90s, which was exciting at the time, but wasn't future-proof. And maybe they couldn't have known that then, but certainly by now there's a need for fiber. The DSL that most Bremen residents are using gets them the average speed reported by 120 survey respondents was 5 megabits per second download and 1 upload. So
wow, that's a significant difference from the 25.3 that you mentioned.
Right, which is what's considered broadband now. And so almost 8 years ago, Tidewater Telecom did secure a Connect Maine grant to build out 8 miles of Bremen with fiber optic. And so a portion of the town has this great access and can attest to that. The Bremen Lobster Co-op, Community Shellfish, Broad Cove Marine, so some important businesses, the Audubon Society, Hog Island Audubon Camp, they all have fiber, so they've been benefiting from this. And those community members really started to rally along with the small committee that formed and to say, yeah, even though we already have it, we want the rest of the town to. We believe this is something that that everyone in our community should have access to because it makes such a difference for their businesses.
Yeah, I was going to ask, were they able to share that there had been a direct impact, positive impact after that development?
my favorite story for anyone tuning in here who wants to go right on to another great live experience after this is the Audubon Hog Island Osprey Cam, the webcam that all the way down Keene Neck Road, not far from the Lobster Co-op, which the Lobster Co-op needs the internet for everything, all the sales that they do, and their accountant works right down there by the Cora Cressy. But the Hog Island Audubon Camp has an Osprey webcam that has millions of viewers around the world tuning in to Bremen, Maine to watch a breeding pair of osprey return to their nest year after year and fledge young osprey. It's a really powerful to once you start following the lives of these osprey. But what it's done is it's engaged thousands of people in conservation work and specifically in coming to Bremen to see the Audubon for themselves. And so it brings people to the state. They really feel like with that technology, they've been able to sustain themselves in ways that maybe, nonprofits like the Audubon would struggle to do otherwise.
It's so great. I mean, just that creativity and the things that maybe we couldn't all plan for, but the positive impact that has in circles of ideas that we wouldn't know initially. That's a great anecdote.
Yeah. So Bremen has done an amazing job. The committee and the community members that came around for the heavy lift of submitting this application to the Connect Maine Authority. And so we've also, through our process, which there'll probably be a story in the Lincoln County News next week about our process and things, because because we just submitted the grant. We're going to be spreading the word on just how we got to that point, partly because our work was always, we were always thinking a lot about Bristol as we did our work, because all of our roads spill into one another's. And we know that we also border Damascotta, which tends to have better broadband in place. There haven't been as many complaints out of Damascotta, although if you're watching and you're from Damascotta and you'd like to start a broadband committee, get in touch with Island Institute. We've got some support materials. But yeah, Bremen's neighbor Bristol also has very similar issues to us, except they have two providers in town. And so they currently have a committee that's working through a similar process to what Bremen did in starting to survey the whole community and get a sense of the need and establish goals. And I believe they're also interested in working with Tidewater to pursue funding and expand the fiber network. And that's partly because that's really where Tidewater is focusing right now, is in building fiber to the home, which is very much what makes sense to me. It's an investment that is going to last.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to comment right now. It sounds like my husband was investigating our internet speed here and shared we're at 18 and 10. So it, but a few minutes before it was 31 and 10. So it changes. Yeah, you can see me. You can say hi.
It does. It does change based on, a lot of factors. Yeah. Some internal to your home, some external based on who's on coming down, the line to your home as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll also share a separate anecdote. My dad was trying to tune in and his internet was not reliable enough this afternoon to be able to stream a live video. So later, but it certainly does. It affects us across the board.
Absolutely. I think it's kind of ironic for our team, as much as we wish it wasn't, but so many of the constituents that we work with don't have great internet. And during this time, and during most times otherwise, we're trying to put on resources online and webinars online so that we're meeting people where they are. They don't have to drive all the way to Portland, or even from Eastport to, Machias or Ellsworth or Rockland, taking that time out of their day. And it's like, but again, they don't have great internet. So
right.
Make sure we record it so they can watch it when they're at the library the next time, or or, whenever, but.
Yeah, absolutely. So Krista, for other towns who are interested in starting this type of work, I mean, it sounds like it really initiated in Bremen as kind of a grassroots conversation that was happening between neighbors and folks who knew a little bit or pieces of the puzzle. What do you recommend for people who are, maybe just individuals living, thinking about this, watching this video, and wanting to get involved in other communities? What are some of the first steps you would recommend?
Kendra Jo might have ideas too, but I would recommend getting in touch with your town office just to say, I'm interested in this. If anyone else in the community that you know of is, give them my number, even just making sure that you've opened yourself up through the town office, because they're often, it's just a central hub in our small towns where there might already be someone working on it. The town planner might already have been doing some analysis of the situation in town. I know that Island Institute, when we don't have a community member direct connection in a community, we still send information to the municipalities. And so often they, they might know to direct community members to us for support, but it's really about finding other people within your own community. The guide that we have, Island Institute, recommends that you form a working group that is representative of multiple sectors, someone who represents education, someone who is an older adult looking to age in place and focused on the opportunities for seniors, somebody who's a telecommuter who's just desperately reliant on good internet. So trying to get kind of a diverse group together. So I think that by starting at the town office, that's often a place where, you might connect with a school board member, you might.
Sure. Yeah, like you said, that they are often the hub of the community. So then, Kendra Jo, if a group of folks are interested and form that committee, at what point do people engage with the Island Institute and this kind of your team? And I know you have the guide. Is it just out there for people to independently look at, or do they connect with you personally and form a working relationship? What does that look like?
Sure. Our resources are all on our website, islandinstitute.org/broadband. So it's pretty easy to find. The guide is all there. It is actually kind of set up, because we used it at our previous statewide summit, almost like a workbook in a couple of spots. So even if someone has a working group or had a working group a couple of years ago and it doesn't know where it's going and it needs that boost, you can still work through it with people in mind. So it kind of meets all of those needs. But yeah, it's getting in touch with us early. There's never a too late, but yeah, just early, and that brings us in, make sure that we can provide our resource, we can provide clarity to the resources, and also start to show, you kind of look like this other community that's down east, or you look like this island in this model, or your economies are similar, or your needs in your community are similar, the way your government works is a little similar. So trying to connect people so that it's not recreating the wheel every time, really learning from each other, connecting with each other. One thing that we really pride ourselves on is being this connecting organization throughout the state and throughout the islands across the United States. And so, yeah, I would just say that it's never too late, but it's also never too early to get in touch with one of us on our team. And I do definitely agree with Krista. People go to the Island Institute, people go to their town office, and they might even just in passing be like, "Oh, what's your internet like?" Right? And hear those things, or or even your library might be another really great anchor institution in your community that knows that. We see a lot of libraries have tech nights. I think in St. George it's either Tuesday or Thursday for an hour or two, and someone comes in and helps people set up their emails and work on their computers and provide those services. And they usually have a pretty good pulse on who's always in there using the internet. They must not have great or who's sitting in the parking lot at the end of the day, those kind of pieces. But definitely getting some people around you looking at our resources, and the main Broadband Coalition's resources as well. It's a statewide coalition of partners who are all focused in on broadband access across the state. They also have some good resources. We have our summits most years. It's a statewide summit that brings people together. We've seen working groups kind of happen out of that summit, right? Especially regional working groups. Two towns finally talking to each other and saying, well, we're just like Bremen and Bristol. We're right next to each other. If we're not working together, we can at least learn from each other and take advantage of whatever each other is doing.
That's great. Yeah. And I'll be sure to add all of those links so folks can see that below in the comments. So thank you. So I feel like we have a good grasp on some of the local initiatives, but I know that there's this bond issue coming up on July 14th, which I'll just reiterate is also my primary election day. So double bonus, but I know it looks like it's a $15 million bond. Can we talk a little bit about what that looks like for the state and how that's going to have a direct impact on local communities?
Sure, absolutely. So the bond vote that's on the July 14th election. So for everyone that maybe just heard, it is in July. It's not in June.
Yes.
So just keep that on your calendar. But the bond issue is $15 million for broadband infrastructure. It is an infrastructure bond. So just like roads and bridges, internet infrastructure in Maine is kind of right along lines of that. It's the backbone of our economy and our education system and so many facets of our life. And so the bond will go to the Connect Maine Authority. They have a statewide action plan that is on their website. So you feel free to kind of look through that and get yourself up to speed on that. But the gist is the Connect Maine Authority has always been this granting institution for community-driven broadband planning grants and infrastructure grants. They have a two-phased approach for planning grants. So that first phase is really that community engagement, surveying, connecting with your community, understanding what is internet. What's internet in Newcastle? What is internet in Damascotta like? So gauging that, getting buy-in, getting conversations going with your providers, connections with your local providers, as well as so your incumbent, we call the provider that's already established in your community. And then for smaller providers who aren't established in your community that are focused on fiber and really focused on community-driven networks, we've seen come in really strong as a partner through this process. The other phase of that planning grant is for the design piece. So really getting down to the nuts and bolts. How much is it going to cost? What does it look like to build out all the areas, some of the areas, those last mile places. And then the other section of grants is the infrastructure grants. So that's really the build. Communities have gone through the community engagement process. They've met all the boxes and everyone's bought in. There's the political will, there's all of these pieces, and finally they're ready for the infrastructure. And so the state funding coming in really helps offset some of that municipal burden or some of the strain on the smaller internet service providers to make sure that these projects are moving forward and that the pieces in place are really forward thinking, future proof, as Krista mentioned earlier, and connected through the community, equitable. Are you trying to reach who's left? Are you trying to reach 100%? Are you trying to make sure all of your institutions are connected? Those kind of things. And the granting process, the Connect Maine Authority has had, I think in this round, they have about $500,000, Bremen just submitted for. So this round that's open right now or just closed is $500,000. That's pretty small when you're talking about large infrastructure grants, but communities have been able to do incredible things with it. And it's always if they just had a little more, or if there was just a little bit more for the statewide investment. And so that's really what this bond is about. We've communities, state leaders have been working on this for years. And so we're really glad to see something come across at the state level that is a bit larger, and it'll be incredible to see what communities are really able to do with that. And there are a lot of communities that are teed up and ready for when that round is available.
That's great. Yeah, so it sounds like a starting investment. It's certainly one that I support. It's a priority, I think, like we've talked about today, for a multitude of reasons. And so, yes, on one. Is that correct? It's going to be the first bond issue?
It will be yes, it was selected as the first question.
Excellent.
Good. And a good chance also to mention Monhegan, which is in your district or perspective district, because
I'm calling it my district. I'm going to be proud to be the representative.
Good. It's in our district, right? It's
I'm a voter anyway, so
exactly, we are first constituents, but Monhegan was able to leverage. Great. Well, did they end up actually applying for a Connect Main or not?
Yeah, so they were able to leverage some planning grant funds and some private foundation funds to receive a large federal grant for bit almost $700,000, a bit over $600,000, and a part of their match is offset by the Connect Main Authority's grant process. So that's an instance where a pretty small piece of state funding was able to leverage such a large piece from the federal government and to connect Monhegan. So hopefully we'll see their build move forward later this year.
Yeah, so that's great. We have 3 awesome examples right here in one legislative district. So I'm excited to hear more about Monhegan, and I will look in the Lincoln County News for an upcoming article about the Bremen project. Good. Well, I really appreciate both of you taking your Friday afternoon, evening to talk with us. Any other sort of final thoughts before I let you all start your weekend?
Yeah, the one kind of last thing I would say to anyone who's watching is a couple of things, and I think you'll probably reiterate it. Regardless of your feelings, just vote. Absentee, it's a little different this year, and we are asking, to really, you can get your absentee ballots, request them now, and then they'll be coming out 30 days prior. So, request them online or from your town clerk and vote. The other is, if you have a story, whether it's, I have terrible internet and I just did a speed test and oh my goodness, I had no idea, that's the reason why I've dropped this Facebook Live a couple times, or you froze, or it's really positive, all the wonderful things that you can do because you're connected. We want to hear those stories. So if you can send them to broadbandstories@islandinstitute.org. We love to hear them. If you can include a picture, it helps us spread those stories throughout the state to share the positive value life has because you're connected, because it's not just a frivolous nicety anymore. It's really needed. It's really a utility. It's necessary for our daily lives in 2020.
Great. Excellent. Yeah, I just submitted my broadband story. It's easy and simple, and I'm excited to read some more of them. Good. Well, thank you, Krista and Kendra Jo, both so much for joining us today. I will put all the information down in the comments so folks can get in touch with folks at the Island Institute if they have more questions, or if town groups are looking to get started on the project of expanding internet. So thank you both again. I really appreciate your help.
Thank you, Lydia.
Great. Take care.
Have a great weekend.
You too. So I'm going to continue on for a minute and just give folks a quick final thoughts about the campaign and where we're at. That was a lot of information. It was so great. I think looking at Monhegan, Bremen, and now Bristol's hard work on these issues it's so inspirational that towns can do this, and that we have an opportunity on July 14th to really support this initiative and to really start a funding model that will expand the service of internet. It's a priority of mine. It's what I will back when I'm in Augusta as your representative. And I think that there are a myriad of ways that it crosses boundaries of socioeconomics, of employment and education history, of medical status, that it's a right that we all have to access the care that we need. And I look forward to talking more about broadband and really prioritizing it as one of my legislative ideas and priorities when I'm in Augusta. So I'm glad we could talk about that. If you have more ideas, we have some exciting stuff coming up in the upcoming weeks, but I want to make sure that this series really addresses some of your concerns and needs. I know with the governor's rural update starting Monday, we're going to see some changes in our local community and our local economy. I'm hopeful. I continue to have some trepidation around health and safety. I want to make sure that we are all taking precautions and maintaining good hygiene. Please share your stories and reach out. You can do that at lydiacrafts.com. You can join our mailing list. We have a bunch of volunteer opportunities coming up as the election gets closer. We're at 67 days now from the primary election. And please, if nothing else, make sure you request your absentee ballot. You can find a link directly at my website. Again, it's lydiacrafts.com. Follow me on Facebook and continue to check out some of our campaign updates. I look forward to continuing the strong campaign, working together, and bringing all of our voices to Augusta as your representative. Thanks so much and take care. Bye.